Hiya. How are we all today? Welcome back to Normal Island Live. I am Sneakcret, and I'm happy to be hosting you for tonight's show. Now, tonight, we're going to be taking a brief reprieve from the UK political scene, partly because I can't listen to another clip of Keir Starmer speaking without giving myself a heart murmur, but partly because we want to take a little bit more of a US focus today. So if you didn't get a chance to watch the Labour conference special on Wednesday, you can see that on the channel now. And as always, we'll be back on Sunday for the debrief. So let us know what you'd like to see covered from the UK side in that show by messaging us at Turn Left Media on Twitter. With that in mind, here is what we have on the cards for tonight. We are going to be talking through It's Bisan from Gaza and I'm Still Alive, winning an Emmy nomination this week despite a smear campaign that was pushed by the so-called Creative Community for Peace. We are going to be talking about the state-mandated murder of Marcellus Williams, which went ahead earlier this week, despite pleas from the victim's family and the prosecutors of his original case to grant clemency. We're going to be talking through some of the empty words from Joe Biden once again, as Israel has continued its devastation of Lebanon after attacks last Tuesday that led to thousands of injuries. And we'll talk through what this means for the region. And finally, we're going to be looking at the latest from the US election. Kamala Harris is now coming slightly ahead in the polls, but with a lot of uncertainty around a number of these swing states, we are going to be joined by a special guest who's going to bring us up to speed also, I hope. Now, before we jump in, I do want to say a huge thank you to everybody who has joined our community, either as a Patreon supporter or through YouTube membership. Turn Left is a growing platform, but we're still all acting as volunteers when it comes to hosting, guesting. Everyone who joins the show is doing it because they care about it and they care about this platform. So anytime that you're able to support, either by sharing the videos, by sharing clips, by becoming a member, or even by contributing one-off donations over at Ko-fi.com, everything is appreciated. So I just want to say thank you again to everyone on that. With us taking this slightly more US perspective tonight in the headlines that we're covering, I'm really excited to welcome Brandon Clark to the show tonight as our guest. Now, Brendan is a leftist content creator from the US. He runs the channel Social Society right here on YouTube. Brandon, how are you tonight?
I'm great. I'm very excited to join you guys to speak about these things.
Fantastic. We did actually, myself and Curtis from Turn Left did appear on Brandon's channel the other day as well. But really appreciate you joining. Excited to get into it. Okay, let's jump into the first story of this evening. It's Bisan from Gaza and I'm Still Alive has won international recognition in the form of an Emmy win earlier this week. Of course, obviously, Bisan herself was unable to join the celebration of her work, but the award was accepted by the Al Jazeera team, who took the opportunity to commemorate the numerous Al Jazeera journalists that have been murdered by Israel in recent years.
The nominees in Outstanding Hard News Feature Story Short Form are Clarissa Ward reports from Rafah Field Hospital in Gaza, CNN. Haiti in Crisis, PBS NewsHour, PBS. How I Survive, a 7-year-old's life in Gaza, The Guardian Focus, The Guardian. I Cry Quietly, a soldier describes the toll of Russia's war, The New York Times. It's Bisan from Gaza and I'm Still Alive, AJ Plus reports, AJ Plus.
And the Emmy Award goes to It's Bisan from Gaza and I'm Still Alive, AJ Plus. AJ Plus reports.
Accepting the Emmy, John Lawrence, Senior Executive Producer.
The carpet bombings happened in the streets without any warning, and people are killed every single moment. This is a really tough day that Gaza are going through. They bombed the door of the hospital. They bombed. I've been there before 2 minutes.
We'd like to thank the Academy for this recognition. This award is testimony to the power of one woman, armed only with an iPhone, who survived almost a year of bombardment. Over 100 Palestinian journalists have been killed in Gaza, including several of our Al Jazeera colleagues. Our bureau in the occupied West Bank was shut down at gunpoint just last week. We thank you, our journalistic community, for this recognition for Bisan and for the AJ Plus team, and we urge you to join us in saying that journalism is not a crime. Thank you so much.
Now, Bisan is a 27-year-old woman who has lost her home. She's lost her livelihood. She's lost family and friends. She spent the last 11 months trying to basically just survive. And in spite of all this, she's continued to use her voice to tell the stories of Gaza to the world. Nobody would dare to deny that she deserves some sort of recognition for that, right? Wrong. Despite the decision makers behind the Emmys already confirming that Bisan's nomination had no tangible grounds for being withdrawn, attorney and executive director of the so-called Creative Community for Peace, Ari Engel, released a statement after the win in which he once again chose to slander Bisan. Speaking on behalf of the group, which consists of a lot of Hollywood producers, actors, the likes of Deborah Messing and Mayim Balik, Ari referred to the night of Bisan's win as being a sad day for journalism. There have been plenty of sad days for journalism in recent months, but I don't think that the night that Bisan won her Emmy is one of them. September the 25th was a sad day for journalism when Abdullah Shakshak was killed by an Israeli quadcopter. August 26th was a sad day when Medo Halimi was killed in an Israeli airstrike. August the 20th was also a sad day when Hamza Abdul Rahman Murtaja was killed in an Israeli airstrike on a school. In fact, there have been more than 100 sad days for journalism since October the 7th. 173 journalists have been killed in Israeli attacks on Gaza since October 7th. Israeli targeting of journalists in the Gaza Strip is so aggressive that the International Federation of Journalists said that the mortality rate for media workers in Gaza is over 10%. And 75% of all journalists killed in 2023 were killed in Gaza between October 7th and the end of last year. As small a gesture as it might seem when you're experiencing what Bisan is experiencing right now, the recognition of her work, and particularly to your US audience, does feel like some sort of step in the right direction. Brandon, I wanted to get your thoughts on this. Do you feel as though the wider media world over there is starting to open up to Palestinian and pro-Palestinian voices, like at least more than maybe it has until now?
Yes and no. I think it depends on the way you want to look at it. Definitely in terms of new media, it has, and recognition, definitely. Like 2 years ago, you couldn't have imagined a documentary or a film like this getting any recognition, despite the fact that this was largely still going on in the area. People kind of just overlooked it. And I think from really the Israeli actions being, you can't ignore them anymore. And that has allowed kind of this avenue for independent journalists, reporters, channels like myself, like yours, like in new media online, to kind of cover and give it more of a forefront in terms of showing it to people. There's more of an audience ready to receive it. Now, not to be the bearer of bad news, so to speak, but there still is, when you're talking about mainstream media, there still is largely either ignoring it or a pushback, kind of as you spoke to, where they're already trying to discredit this film because it won an award. And a lot of the reporting you see from these mainstream media outlets have more to do with what this group is saying about the documentary than the documentary itself. Things like Gaza have largely fallen out of the media cycle here in terms of like CNN, MSNBC. They're just not really covering it in the same. So it's kind of like old media, mainstream media versus new media. But yes, it definitely is a step in the right direction in terms of it's finally getting the recognition that it's needed in the decades that this has been going on.
I remember, I think, was it the award win for what was the film? The film that was the something zone. The Zone of Interest a few months back, where the awards acceptance speech, they made comments around like Gaza and Palestine, and it was completely, was it booed? It was really poorly received by the people in the crowd at the time.
Yeah, and I don't keep up with all the award shows, but there was one recently, one of the big ones that they do where everyone who came out and gave a speech, like, or just even said Free Palestine, that mentioned Gaza, that they were booed. And it's just this kind of reception at a lot of colleges. There's speakers giving commencement speeches who want to mention Palestine. They're either not allowed to give those speeches or they've directly been told, hey, you're not allowed to mention this. So there still kind of is that suppression going on at the same time when it's still managing to break through.
Mm-hmm. I think that's something that we'll start to touch on a little bit later as well when we start talking through a little bit more of what's happening from Biden's side, especially with what's happening in Lebanon. It does feel like we're starting to get this disconnect now of it's either silence or people are aware of the kind of hypocrisy of what we're seeing. But I think we will jump into that when we go into that part in just a little bit. Thank you very much, Brandon. Now, before we do move into the next topic, I noticed when looking at a lot of the coverage of Bisan winning this Emmy, a number of publications covering the story haven't actually included Bisan's words on the statement, around her win. So I do want to share them here. In a press release that was shared by Al Jazeera, Bisan's statement was shared, and she said, "We all know the truth, but our fear undermines our ability to say it out loud and sometimes even drives us to hide it. But remember that a world without colonialism is a world without fear, and that truth is the only way we can be free from fear." Okay. The next story is sadly not an unusual one. We're going to talk about Marcellus Williams. So on Tuesday night at around 6 p.m. In the US, in local time, the 55-year-old Marcellus Williams was executed by the state of Missouri against the wishes of the victim's family and against the wishes of the prosecutors in his original case. Marcellus was one of 5 state-sanctioned executions that were scheduled for this week, but questions around his trial and concerns around the nature of his conviction threw Missouri's justice system into the spotlight. There were things like a lack of DNA evidence on the murder weapon and forensic proof that the murder weapon was mishandled at the time. There were reports that his original jury had numerous black jurors deselected, including one for looking like he could be his brother. There are a lot of questions that were around the case of Marcellus Williams that were ignored by the state's attorney general, who pushed forward very aggressively to move forward with his execution. In fact, in August this year, Williams and his prosecutors reached an agreement to halt his execution. He would plead no contest to first-degree murder in exchange for a new sentence of life without parole. His lawyers at the time said that this wasn't an admission of guilt. It was just designed to help save his life whilst he pursued new evidence to prove his innocence. A judge signed off on that agreement. The victim's family signed off on that agreement, but Attorney General Andrew Bailey challenged it, and the state Supreme Court blocked it. The Innocence Project, who were fighting for clemency for Williams even up to the hour before his execution, shared that the vast majority of people exonerated from death row are Black or Latinx, and more than half of death row exonerees are Black. Inconsistencies in death sentence cases are far more common when it comes to Black and Latinx prisoners than they are white. But it's also important to acknowledge that they're pretty common overall. Just last week, Khalil Divine Black son Allah was executed in South Carolina, despite the fact that one of the key witnesses in his case completely retracted their testimony. In a lot of cases, it almost feels like pushing forward with these executions is more of a point of pride for the court, or trying to avoid some sort of lawsuit for mishandling of the case. In the case of Marcellus, there were plenty of questions, but there are also questions around the intentions of the Attorney General, Andrew Bailey. So Andrew Bailey and his office have a history of fighting against the rights of people who have been wrongfully convicted to be exonerated. There are numerous cases over the years. You can look it up for yourself. He's blocked challenges to convictions. He's said again and again that justice has already been served. But he doesn't always feel that way. So I wanted to share tonight one of the videos that we've seen from the creator Drake from Texas on TikTok, talking through his track record as Attorney General.
The Missouri governor is granting pardons at a pace not seen since the World War II era. I thought I'd go through a list of some of the Missourians Mike Parson has granted clemency to in his time as governor. Kenny Batson, now a free man and a local pastor, convicted of car vandalism, burglary, DUI, and, quote, nearly beating a man out of this life and into the next. Pardoned 2022, freed from prison, voting rights fully restored. Britt Reed, son of Chiefs coach Andy Reid, convicted of DUI after crashing his truck, injuring 6 total, including sending a 5-year-old girl into a coma for 11 days with a traumatic brain injury. Sentenced to 3 years in prison, Governor Parsons commuted his sentence without consulting the prosecutors or the victim's family, reducing time served to be under house arrest. Mark and Patricia McCloskey, the St. Louis couple, who, upon seeing George Floyd protesters walking past their home, assumed the position outside, rifles in hand, aimed at the peaceful protesters. Convicted of misdemeanor assault, pardoned 6 weeks later. Marcellus Williams, an inmate for nearly 20 years on a murder conviction, who has maintained his innocence the entirety of his prison stay. The prosecutors who originally sent Marcellus to prison had reversed course and have been pleading with the governor to stay the execution, spare Marcellus's life. After admitting they purposefully packed the jury with white jurors, the 2 main trial witnesses were not credible, and new DNA testing found none of Marcellus's DNA on the weapon used. The DNA that was found on the weapon was that of the prosecutors, after they mishandled the weapon without gloves. The victim's family has since come forward begging the governor, the state attorney general, and the state Supreme Court to stop the impending execution. Not obliged. The United States Supreme Court had an opportunity to stop the execution. The 3 liberal justices opined that the execution should not go forward. The 6 conservative justices, 3 of which were appointed by Donald Trump himself, said go right ahead. The same 6 conservative justices, 3 of which were appointed by Donald Trump himself, opined just months ago that Donald Trump is immune from prosecution of any crime he does as long as it's an official act as President of the United States. Marcellus Williams was not seeking to have his voting rights restored, like Kenny Batson. He wasn't seeking to spend the rest of his sentence in the comfort of his own home, like Britt Reed. He wasn't seeking to have his charges completely dropped, like the McCloskeys. He was seeking to remain alive in this world. That was a bridge too far for each Republican with the power to do so. Politics matters in every way. It touches everything. Please vote.
Now, this Attorney General obviously has a number of causes that he is very passionate about, but saving Marcellus Williams' life was not one of them. Attorney General Andrew Bailey also made the news earlier this year for fighting for justice for Elon Musk, of all people. So last year, when the watchdog group Media Matters reported correctly, by the way, that advertiser content on X was being displayed alongside extremist images and content, Andrew Bailey felt so strongly about this injustice that was being done to, again, the billionaire Elon Musk, that he served the group with civil investigative demands. Obviously, this was dropped. But Brandon, I don't know, this case, I think, for a lot of younger activists or people who are getting politically involved for the first time, and in the UK, a lot of people seem to be really jarred by the case. I feel like headlines like this and stories like this, we've seen it a lot of times before. It doesn't feel brand new for a lot of us. But what has been the reaction on the US side? What is your community? What are your audiences feeling around this?
Yeah, definitely more left-leaning people, and with younger people, this is resonating as a real issue, because I think when you see things like this, it sheds a light on a larger issue, which is that elites will always protect elites, but they're not going to protect the people. And that's what you would hope that the state, the government is there to do, is to provide protections for you, not to murder you with plenty of evidence that you could be innocent, right? And something I think is important to note, that in that video of, I think it was Drake from Texas, where he shows the people who have gotten pardoned, every one of them was white, and the first black person they showed was the one that didn't get pardoned, that had his life taken from him. And it's also important to note that this is the reality in 27 states in America still. Like, there's plenty of states where this is still allowed, where this is still happening every day. I mean, there's tons of cases even right now that are getting pushed ahead for execution. And to me, I don't think that the death penalty should exist, period. I don't think that humans should be playing God against other humans, especially when it's like conservatives and we have these conservative judges that are, their courts are packed, that will always just back up what these tough on crime prosecutors want to do, again with plenty of presumptive evidence. Like, it's weird to me that people can sleep at night knowing they killed someone with there even being a 1% chance of them being innocent, let alone with, like in Marcellus Williams' case, where his fingerprints weren't on the weapon. The prosecutor admitted that that evidence was mishandled. The family of the victim said, hey, closure for us is Marcellus Williams' life not being taken, that all these people were pushing. There was a deal on the table, as you said, for him to take life rather than to lose his life. And despite all of that, a Republican attorney general in a deep red state can still push forward and take someone's life from them.
Yeah, I mean, it's this thing of like, there's almost this debate of like, well, was he guilty or innocent? It's like the fact that there is a debate on that question at all. Like, I think it was his defense attorney who made a statement just before the execution, who said, like, if you believe that the death penalty should exist, but only for people who are guilty, then by its nature, you believe in killing innocent people, because it's difficult to find too many cases where it is 100% certainty that someone has committed the crimes that they're being sentenced to death for. There are so many cases. I think it's something like 200 people since 1989 have been exonerated after they've been executed. It just feels like, especially when you've got these people who have been incarcerated for 20 years, 30 years for crimes that were committed, or that they've been convicted of, where they didn't even have forensic evidence at the times of their convictions. It's just, it's very upsetting to see that there's like 5 of these happening this week. And it's kind of happening again and again, but I guess it's difficult to see what the solution is when you have these people in power, like the likes of Andrew Bailey, who have clearly an incredibly large bias, who is a Republican attorney general as well. I don't know. What do you kind of see as actions out of it? Are there any major movements that are kind of shifting as a result of it that you've seen?
The biggest thing is like the man in the clip said, is you need to get out and vote. I think it's a lot of people feel like they don't care about politics because politics doesn't work for them. And I always try to tell you that if you remove your vote, like the one voice you have in this system, you're allowing politics to work against you, right? Like, you have to try to make change. Change isn't going to come to you. And again, I think it also speaks to another larger issue where, like, unconscious racial bias is a huge problem in our judicial system. And that's why these things disproportionately affect Black and brown people are put onto death row more than white people. They're exonerated more than white people, yet we still allow these things to happen. So I think the same as most movements they typically start on the ground with these social organizings. Like, there were mass petitions for Marcellus Williams to get pardoned. And usually it, sadly, unfortunately, takes a story like this to really hit mainstream media in America for people to realize, like, I have to get up and do something about this because I could be him, like I'm not that different from him. That could be me. I need to do something to stop this. And it starts on the ground with these kind of social movements building. And then liberals in our country tend to adopt things from these social movements once they become like electable positions. So it's about bringing it to the forefront where enough people care about this, where they will vote about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is not a US exclusive thing with the liberals hopping on board, but it is, I think, was it in the case of Khalil, it was something like there was like 2 million signatures on petitions because one of the key witnesses was like, I don't want him to be executed on a false statement.
And yeah, exactly. I was going to say, not only did he just recant his testimony, but he admitted that he lied in the testimony that made him found guilty, and yet they still went ahead and executed him despite that, despite millions of signatures, despite the liberal judges on the Supreme Court saying that they would go with a stay. It's just, when conservatives pack the courts the way they do, there's not much you can do in the right now.
No, I mean, I think when I was looking at the headline the other day, it was like, I can't comprehend that there's a I know why it's there. I know that how all of this works. It makes sense, like in the horrible way that it does. But it's like the idea that there are people in like office buildings or in courts arguing specifically to kill someone. And going, no, I really want this person to be killed. Is like, is it not better to be safe than sorry? No, I guess is the answer. When it comes to especially Republican attorney generals and the likes of Andrew Bailey.
And you would think, as you said, after I think it's over 200 people that have been exonerated after being killed since 1979, if I'm correct, you would think that they would have a pause in how forcefully they were.
Maybe this isn't working so well.
Right?
Yeah, maybe we're not doing this right.
Wrong quite a few times. It's like 16%. Like it's a substantial percent.
That's a big percent.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's just, but tough on crime is something that sells for some reason to people, even though literally any data on the matter will show you that being tough on crime does not deter crime. So
no, we actually talked about that the other day when we had luckily it has now been retracted by the Labour Party, but there was a period where they were talking about needing more prison spaces, and they wouldn't deny the idea that they were going to get more prison spaces in Estonia and send prisoners to Estonia. And there are so many statistics around prison reform foundation in the UK where incarceration is like the worst possible option for people reoffending, people being incarcerated. And we're talking about people who might not even have done the crimes that they've been convicted of, right?
Yeah, it typically makes you more likely to commit more crimes, especially when you put it up against statistics of rehabilitation measures. And then another side of that I think a lot of people don't talk about enough is that it breeds poverty. Like if you're taking it, for example, like if somebody is the main breadwinner, the main financial foundation of their family, and you take them and you lock them up for a rather petty crime, and even if it's just a couple weeks until trial, they could miss a check, miss 2 checks, miss rent. That steamrolls and snowballs until like you're just breeding poverty, which is the conditions that lead to even more crime.
It's I mean it's miserable, it's horrible, it is continuing so blatantly as well. Luckily though, obviously that attorney general feels very strongly about looking out for Elon Musk.
Somebody's got to protect the billionaires in this world, in this country, because we're so oppressed.
He's not going to take him to space, and I think he needs to come to terms with that. But thank you, Brandon. I want to hear a little bit from the chat now, or anybody watching the stream. I want to have a quick look at some of your thoughts from the stories so far, any of your comments. Capital punishment is an abomination. Absolutely, double D. I do also want to thank any of our gifters, any of our patrons as well. Having a look through here, we also have the film Belle from Gaza. Really want to see that film. That is a fantastic recommendation for anybody watching. There has been some incredible documentaries and films coming out recently around Palestine and Gaza, and there have been some fantastic stories of people amplifying the voices of people from Gaza as well, and filmmakers. So yes, definitely recommend and watch that. On the pro-Palestinian but not Palestine side itself, we have Macklemore dropping Heinz Hall 2, featuring Ines, MC Abdul, and Emma Zar as well. And yeah, Palestine is about humanity. It's not about being left or right. And there is no evidence that capital punishment reduces crime. I think we are all very much on the same page so far tonight then. But thank you again for everybody who is in the chat with us. Of course, if you are enjoying tuning into the live stream, tuning into the live show with us, please do go ahead and support us. You can hit the subscribe button if you want to. You can also hit the like or the share or the little heart react that I don't really know what it does. Remember, there is a lot of news happening. It's happening all the time. If you want us to cover it, you can help us grow the platform by supporting us. We actually have a new link set up over at turnleftmedia.co.uk/support, which is where you can support us monthly. You can make a one-off donation. Anything is incredibly helpful, and it's a big step towards helping Turn Left become a full-time, fully fledged media organization. So thank you very much. Okay, right, on to the next story. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the importance of diplomacy from the perspective of the US. 1 week before Israel launched its assault on Lebanon that's killed more than 500 people so far, the United States sent a diplomat to Israel with the stated goal of promoting de-escalation. And Amos Hochstein arrived in Israel the day after hundreds of communication devices in Lebanon exploded at the same time, which killed and injured civilians, like numbering in the thousands. Here is how the de-escalation and diplomacy efforts are going so far. Israel themselves have gladly professed to launching more than 650 attacks on Lebanon since September 23rd. September 23rd. They have killed more than 500 people. At least 50 of those people were children. Now, even in the face of what is pretty blatant escalation, the White House have not made any specific comments condemning Israel's actions. Obviously, Israel's justification for all of this and this indiscriminate assault has been that they are, as always, targeting Hamas. And as always, the White House have said that Israel has a right and responsibility even to go after Hamas leaders. They've also not yet acknowledged any involvement from Israel in those explosions that went off last week. But just to be safe, they haven't condemned those explosions either. None of this is new, right? But the media this week have been covering Biden's last ever UN address as president. And the BBC reported this as Biden struggling to contain the conflict. In the speech, Biden said that a diplomatic solution is still possible. In fact, it remains the only path to lasting security, which is very kind of him to care so greatly about diplomatic solutions. Or it would be if he hadn't 1 month earlier, almost to the day, cleared another $20 billion worth of arms sales to Israel. We've heard empty words before, but when almost the entirety of the international community is now condemning various things from Israel's occupation to the war crimes that are being committed, the contrast that we're seeing from the US government between their words and their actions just feels like it's getting more and more blatant by the day. Brandon, I feel like the way that I've introduced that sounds like I'm going to ask you to answer for it.
I'm not answering for Biden on that. I can tell you that right now.
And what are you... Well, I mean, because we've talked about it before, right? We talked about it on your channel about this disconnect that's happening between the US and the rest of the world on Israel, even in the UK, where the government are refusing to condemn the actions. They're still abstaining from votes. There's a growing amount of dissent and kind of almost embarrassment on what they're endorsing. Now, on, I think, was it Wednesday, Bernie Sanders introduced his bill to block $20 billion in arms sales from moving forwards. Where do you feel that we're at the moment with this? Do you think Biden's just waiting out his time and trying to keep the peace with his words until then? Do you think there is actually a chance that this bill will pass? What are you feeling?
I think Democrats as a whole are just doing their best case for damage control in hopes that they don't completely torpedo their election chances. And make no mistakes about it, Biden is the most far-right Democrat on Israel that we have. And I mean, there's a lot of really Zionist Democrats. I mean, in the 2020 debates, when Biden was asked if he would ever condition support to Israel, he said, no, I would never condition support to Israel. And one thing I can give him, I guess, is that he's a man of his word, because despite Israel committing genocide and a multitude of war crimes, I mean, we could talk about the pagers being detonated in Lebanon. We could talk about them carpet bombing Lebanon. You could go down the list of their war crimes, right? There's hundreds of them. And he hasn't conditioned aid at all. You talked about the package Bernie Sanders had introduced into Congress. Unfortunately, it has absolutely no chance to pass. There's not a single Republican that's going to sign on it. Republicans are abhorrent on the issue. And unfortunately, most Democrats aren't going to sign off on that either, because they're funded by AIPAC. AIPAC plays both sides of our politics. They've done it very well, in so much that people won't even say the word genocide. The way that they cover these issues, you'll hear when an Israeli person dies, it was Israeli killed by Hamas, Israeli killed by terrorist group. If a Palestinian dies, it's just Palestinian died in West Bank. And it's like, who killed them? Like
died in blast. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And so unfortunately, we're not even close to where we need to be. We are taking the first baby steps. But it's at that point where, despite there being massive outcry for it, despite Democrats massively losing the Muslim vote in key states that they need the Muslim vote, which we'll probably get into when we talk more about the election, despite all of this, despite Biden having completely torpedoed his electability, his election chances, they just can't get away from this position of Zionism, right? Where you could see even before October 7th, Biden had way better favorability. He had progressives even willing to vote for him. He has a lot of things that were surprisingly progressive wins in his administration. But since then, he's completely broken the left off into two factions where like now, again, like he's lost the Muslim vote, he's lost the progressive vote, he had lost the younger vote. Kamala's getting some of that back, but she's not too far from Biden on the issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels it's a little bit scary now, I'll say. And I know it's been scary the entire time. It's not, I think the thing that I'm nervous about at this stage is, you know, like there's the thing when people do like an interrogation and they're trying to get someone to confess where they give them an out. And the idea is that out gives them a chance to kind of alleviate some of their responsibility and like move away from, like, they don't have to go full mask off evil because they can say, oh, it was partly because of this. Mm-hmm. It feels like with the US, we're past, like, they've had a lot of outs.
Yep.
To be able to distance themselves from Netanyahu, to be able to say, okay, actually, we didn't realize it was this bad, and start to split away. And the US government haven't taken any of those. And they're just barreling forwards. Meanwhile, the UN is proactively saying, this is an illegal occupation. These are war crimes. It really makes me nervous how far mask off we're going to go. Do you feel like the election will kind of put a pause on this? Do you think it'll change the tactics after the election has taken place? Like, I just don't know what the end is here.
I think it largely depends in terms of the election playing a key in it. I think, unfortunately, which is a sad reality given all that's at stake in this election, I think the only way that the election could shape this is if Democrats lose because of this issue. If like they lose these crucial swing states because of the Muslim vote, that would wake Democrats up and realize like, hey, we have to do more than lip service on this. Lip service isn't enough. Sadly, that would lead to probably worse outcomes in the Middle East. It would lead to worse outcomes abroad and lead to worse outcomes domestically in the US. But yeah, I don't know what's going to do it. And you're exactly right about having outs. Biden, I don't know, I'm sure you guys probably covered it. Biden said forever ago, the red line is Rafah, right? We have the refugee camp in Rafah.
Oh my God, yeah, Rafah.
If they cross into Rafah, we are withholding munitions, right? Since then, Israel has conducted 7 airstrikes specifically on refugee zones. Not a peep from Biden. He doesn't even talk about it anymore because he knows he's not going to keep up the red line. So he doesn't even pay lip service to it. And it's going to come back to bite them one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. I think, yeah, there was a protest earlier in the month in the UK called in Brighton where they did the red line, where I think it was half a kilometre along this red line that they like unveiled along the protest, because it has been the same thing again and again of, well, we're not going to allow this. I think what's happening at the moment seems to be, we're not going to allow an escalation in the region, but they're not saying that what is happening in Lebanon counts as war. Yeah. Well, that doesn't count. That's just 650 strikes in the space of 4 days.
That's how it is with any Arab country. It's just not to the same standard at all. Israel is always defending itself, even though since October 7th, 82% of the rockets that have been fired have came from Israel into Lebanon. It's Israel defending themselves.
Yeah. That's what happened with us in the UK recently, where when they were trying to investigate whether or not the weapons were defensive or offensive, it turned out that actually we seemingly don't know what counts as offensive or defensive, and that's why we can't suspend arms sales, which felt telling.
Yeah,
but
it's just whatever scapegoat they can use.
Any scapegoat. I think that's it. I mean, there's a couple of points in the chat. There are movements like Code Pink in the US that are exposing a lot of the work, a lot of the lobby machine that's going on behind the scenes. I think they've just released a new website, or they've launched a new website called boughtbyzionism.org, which focuses on the Zionist lobby machine itself. The corruption is everywhere. It's unbelievable. I think there was someone else in the chat who mentioned like there's no good outcome from what happens from the US at this point. Like it feels like it's going to be some sort of like Scooby-Doo situation, where they're going to take off the mask at the end and be like, haha, I was a bad guy all along. Yeah. But I don't know how far we can keep keep pretending that that's not the case with what's been
Yeah,
happening.
see, it's weird because like when things like how far are said or how far will go, like we're already at the point that the ICJ has said, hey, they're illegally occupying these people. It constitutes apartheid. Genocide is happening. Plenty of genocide scholars agree with this. There's destructions. Over 60% of Gaza has been leveled. There's war crimes happening in the Middle East from Israel almost every single day, and yet America's still just like, what's happening over there?
If only
looking
we
this way.
knew. Yeah, I had no idea. I wouldn't class it that. It's not that kind of genocide.
Yeah, no, it's the kind we can still fund, you know.
Yeah. That's a defensive genocide.
Yeah,
That's actually the comment that we've just got up from Double D will bring us into our last kind of discussion point. We wanted to talk a little bit about the election. We can't have someone on from the US and not ask them about the election, essentially. But I want to go into it. Also, if anyone does have any questions for Brandon, wants to ask anything, add any comments, please do drop them in the chat now. Coming into the last topic for tonight, the US election is looming. So Kamala Harris is now leading in the national polls by a very, very small margin after the debate that took place where Trump said people were eating their pets. However, there are still a lot of kind of interesting points and kind of linchpins that are happening around a number of the swing states. Brandon, I feel like I'm not going to blame you for the election this time, but I feel like you're probably bored of hearing this from non-US people, but it does feel pretty stunning that Trump isn't like completely on track to get decimated in the polls. What is happening?
So here's the dirty secret as to why this is happening. Trump has done fascism. He's done the
I knew
walking
it.
people into it. Exactly, right? No, unmask, it's fascism. Yeah, no. He's done the first parts of this very, very well, which is he's gotten his entire base to mistrust institutions, mistrust the media, mistrust empirical data. They don't trust any of that if it doesn't come directly from Trump's mouth. So in that regard, it doesn't matter that he's now a 34-time convicted felon. It doesn't matter that he's liable for sexual assault. It doesn't matter that he's been liable for fraud. It doesn't matter he has 54 indictments, felony indictments that he's still facing, because everyone will just say that's fake news. It doesn't matter that he literally tried to steal the 2020 election and coup the government, because that's fake news too. It doesn't matter that he riled up a riot to go to the Capitol on January 6th, because that was Antifa. That was Black Lives Matter. It wasn't Republicans. Plot twist, Uno reverse, and it's just anything that he spews to his base, they will buy it. And there's a large amount of people, I call them they're like Trump Republicans, because most of them I feel like didn't follow politics before Trump came into politics, and they were just so enamored by who he was or like some of the things he said, maybe because he's a kind of a exciting, like he could be funny, right, to watch in terms of like I can't look away from a car crash type of entertainment. He's entertaining in a way. So
yeah.
There's the people who are enamored by that, by maybe one thing. Maybe they're like, yeah, I really like being tough on the border. And because of that, and them not really understanding how politics work outside of Trump, they formed their entire political identity around Trump, which has kept him in the good graces of the Republican Party, despite causing them to lose every single election since he's been elected. They underperformed in 2018, lost. They underperformed in 2020, lost the presidency as well. Underperformed in 2022, and they got clean sweeped in special elections in 2023. So it's been a losing effort, this Trump at the forefront of their party. And if you looked at polling from the primary, one last point real quick, if you looked at polling from the Republican primary, both Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley were crushing Biden. Like Nikki Haley at one point in a probable matchup was up like 20 points on Biden. Like it would have been a hogwash. Like this having to switch a candidate at the last second would have been the end of the Democrats. But they're so like in a cult fashion just aligned with Trump that they went against the best interests of their own party.
It is crazy. I think you're right though that like he does have that it's kind of like what we had with Boris Johnson here. Like Boris Johnson was like a worst teeth version. But like I saw something about like Donald Trump being like he should have been a drag queen. Like he has like the sass of a drag queen, but he's been born into the wrong body and now he's doing fascism, and it's soured it slightly.
born a billionaire. You know, it happens.
He kind of messed it up. Yeah, but it's bizarre that he's kind of continuing on. But then again, I've seen recently that like the polling, it's not necessarily that people are turning away from the Democrats and voting Republican, but there are Democrats who are choosing not to engage in this election.
Yep, that is the problem. It's actually kind of vice versa. There's tons of Republicans who are disengaging, like the Mitt Romney types, the sadly Dick Cheney types. Sadly, again, I say that with puke coming out of my mouth. That are like, we can't vote for Trump, so we'll come with Harris to get him out of office.
Right.
With Democrats, their biggest problem is losing the Muslim vote, losing the young vote, the people who actually are like, hey, genocide is the defining issue for me. Where it looks up is that in some of these swing states, Kamala has consistently been up. In the average of swing states polls, she has consistently been up. It's looking like at this moment, Pennsylvania is going to kind of decide the election. The win probability for both candidates is over 90% if they win Pennsylvania. So that is like the main state. Both of their pass, they both have a couple pass, and both of them, they have to win Pennsylvania for. Or they would pretty much have to do like a clean sweep that hasn't been seen in a long time.
Oh, wow. Pennsylvania.
Yep.
Oh,
yeah.
No.
Like for Harris, if she wins Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, she wins. As long as she wins all the states that typically vote Democrat. For Trump, if he wins Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Nevada, I think, or maybe North Carolina, one of the two, he wins. So and that's both of their best paths to the office. So they have to get Pennsylvania.
Oh my God. The electoral system stresses me out so much.
It is. It's in a democracy, you know, like who would think that the candidate who consistently has been leading in the national polls, who undoubtedly is going to win the popular vote, might not be the president. Like, it's kind of insane.
It is insane. I think it ties into as well a lot of what we saw in the UK in July. I'm not going to specifically reference anything that Keir Starmer said, but there was a whole movement in the UK around like tactical voting in the election, and there was a lot of, it became very clear very quickly that like this people who considered themselves center left resented people on the left who did not want to, who couldn't with their conscience support the Labour Party. I know it's a little bit different in the US because there aren't as many third party options, but at the same time, yeah, it was this kind of this feeling of like, you're ruining it. You're ruining the win for the Labour Party, even if the Labour Party is transphobic and you're trans, even if the Labour Party is anti-immigration and you're an immigrant, you should just kind of bottle it and just vote for them anyway. And what I tried to talk about a lot at the time was the idea that like who you say you're going to vote for can be different to who you vote for on the day, because it feels like the center and people who support the Democrats no matter what, like blue no matter who, I forgot which one is. Yeah,
blue MAGA is what we call them.
Yeah, blue is Democrat as well. Also, I got mixed up. But it was this kind of idea of like, don't worry, we'll vote for you no matter what you do. Is like the stupidest way of getting any kind of accommodations from a party. Like, oh, don't worry, like you could literally do anything and I'll still vote for you. Like, you just completely cheapen your own value. But it seems like whenever people do this, we get kind of vilified for it, for, you know, handing the win over to the right.
Yeah, it's the same in America. Liberals spend more time attacking leftists than they do the right, and they try to feel like they have this moral superiority to where if you're not going to vote the Democrats, even if like let's say you're an immigrant, right, and the Democrats have shifted very right, like they're supporting the wall at this point, right, and you feel disaffected by that. Liberals will be like, yeah, well, Trump will do this. Or an easier example to paint is with Palestine, right? Where Muslim Americans are like, hey, I can't in good conscience vote for someone part of an administration enabling a genocide. And liberals will be like, well, you're just going to let Trump come in and he's going to be so much worse. And it's like, well, at the point that both parties are going to do genocide, it's like, how much worse? You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of what it opens the door to. I do think with how much is on the line with this election, that it is pertinent, or I try to push the message of we should vote against Trump. I do think that's important, but I'm the last person who would like morally hold it against someone if they're like, I can't vote for Kamala because of this reason or this reason or this reason. I completely understand. There's tons of reasons. that
Mm-hmm.
could not support Democrats. I speak out about a ton of them on my channel as well. And as you said, it's if you're not going to try to extract concessions from your politicians, if you're not going to try to push them to the left, the Overton window is going to push them to the right, and you're going to lose out on these things. And there's evidence of this happening, right? In 2016, in 2018, or we'll start in 2008, nobody was talking about Medicare for all, right? Like
No.
Obamacare was radical at that point, right? Allowing our seniors to have healthcare was radical. By 2016, yeah, exactly. By 2016, because of like Jill Stein getting a large percent of the vote and Bernie Sanders also running as a Democrat for Medicare for all, has pushed to where Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton both in 2016 were talking about having a public option. Hillary Clinton then put it in her campaign when she won the nomination in 2020. Biden, which is it's one of his shortcomings in his administration, he didn't even try to get the public option, but he ran on, I will create a public option for everyone. And that's what the goal of the people should be, is to extract these kind of concessions from your politicians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it feels like common sense to me. It's like, when the people who always get the refunds, the people who always get the best deals, the people who make a big fuss, like who are pains in the ass when it comes to customer service.
Exactly.
This idea of
stop doing that to cashiers and do it to politicians.
Yeah. Stop doing it like in the coffee shop and do it to your leaders. Like it's all of this stuff recently with Chapel Roan being told off because she said that she couldn't endorse either of them. They were talking about there's a difference. I think she said herself, she was like, there's a difference between voting and endorsing.
Yes.
And I just can't endorse those people.
She specifically said she will vote for Kamala Harris too. That is like what outraged me the most about this. And there's tons of channels that I respect, right? I'm not going to name them because I respect them, right? I do think they do pretty good coverage, but it's like, they're like just crashing out about this on Twitter. And it's like, she said she's going to vote for Kamala, but she's falling short on a lot of issues to where this person doesn't want to put her entire name behind it because she doesn't support everything behind it. And that's completely fine to say. Like, I get that, especially when you have to realize a lot of the times with Democrats, it is lip service with a lot of things. And I'm not scared to admit it. It's lip service at times is better than, people who are going to actively erode away those rights. It's important to remember that. And that's why I do support Democrats when it comes election time. But like an important point that I was talking to a psychoanalyst about gender ideology and identity and things. And a really good point that she made to me is that representation isn't always equality, right? Like just because you can see same-sex couples in movies and books doesn't mean that same-sex couples have the same rights. Same with trans people. Just because a trans person is in a Hollywood movie or Biden appoints a trans person to a position in his cabinet doesn't mean trans people have the same amount of rights. And a lot of times for Democrats, that's kind of where they end. So again, I would understand where people are like, hey, they're not doing enough for me to put my entire namesake and who I am behind them. So I do still think it is important to vote against the fascists. I will say that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair. I think that's the thing that we're seeing the aftermath of now in the UK is there were a lot of, and I will name them, anti-Tory League. I've seen you in the comments. I've seen you talking shit about Diane Abbott, and you need to stop it. There's a lot of these where people were saying ahead of the election, like just like hold your breath and just do it. Like, I know that it's not perfect, but once they get in, maybe things will improve, and then you can apply pressure, then you can push for progress. And ever since the election happened, nobody's said shit.
Yeah.
Everybody's just kind of faded away. Don't really know what everyone's up to anymore. Yeah. But the people who were like, we'll totally be by your side. We're going to get in. Oh, don't worry. We'll be pushing with you. We're like, oh, okay, we trust you. They've gone. Crickets.
Yeah, and that's like for me, I think it depends on the election. I think there's a lot of things you have to take in to weigh the real risk versus the reward of like withholding your vote. Because in every election, Democrats are going to say this is the most important election of our lifetime. We have a lot at stake. And a lot of the times it doesn't ring true. Sometimes it does. I myself have I voted in the primary this year for Marianne Williamson. That was my first time ever voting for Democrats. I voted Green in 2020, voted Green in 2016. Never supported Democrats before in my life. In this election with Project 2025, with the different things that Trump is talking about doing, mass deportation, like raising our prices with tariffs, not having any policies at all, literally being liable for rape. I mean, I could go on for 10 minutes about the reasons I would vote against Trump. That was enough for me to vote Democrat. But still, in the primary, I didn't vote for Joe Biden. I voted for the most left candidate running as a Democrat, who was Marianne Williamson at the time, because again, there's benefits you can see from more progressive candidates getting votes in primaries, it moves the party left, and then the nominee, the eventual nominee, feels like he has to assuade those demands more than he can just, nobody voted for Medicare for all, I'm not even going to talk about it, because that's how it's going to be for politicians.
It's yeah, I've got myself annoyed. Just
yeah, it happens to me all the time when I talk about Democrats and Republicans. And, you know, if I can real quick, what gets me the most is when I'm talking about these issues, or when I'm pointing out like the mass, just despicable, disgusting nature of Republicans in America, people will be like, just paint me as a Biden guy, or like I'm like a staunch Democrat. And it's just like, I'm not a Biden guy, right? If after this election, there's probably more disagreeing videos that I would make about Democrats than agreeing ones, right? But I do think, for me personally, at least, when I weigh the things that I care about, there is a lot of moral imperative for me to make sure that the Democrats win. And that's why that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's very difficult navigating the internet on this as well, because everybody is so black and white. If you criticize one side, you will be told that you must be for the other. And
I've called a centrist.
Yeah, one of my videos, I had to check in actually with Brandon earlier to see what liberal meant in the US, because a lot of people had seen one of my videos the other day and started calling me a liberal, and I had to reply being like, I'm way past that. That is way like liberal. Come on.
Yeah, no, it's liberal is a dirty word in leftist spaces, which is funny because it's a dirty word on right-wing spaces too. So it's becoming ever so more unpopular to be a liberal.
Yeah, I never know which way I'm being insulted.
Yeah, exactly.
Specifically, but such is the life of a leftist.
And it's weird for me because I'm kind of in that like in between, right? Where when I'm with lefties, a lot of the time they'll be like, "Oh, you're lib-pilled. You've got, you know, liberal ideology has gotten to you." But then I get around like liberals and they're like, "You're a leftist. I'm gonna thumb my nose at you and all this." And it's like, I just want to fit in somewhere, guys. Like,
oh. That's the thing. Leftists in the end, we just like it feels like we get told a lot of the time, like, oh, you're never happy, like you're always excluding everyone. It's like, no, I just want to be able to vote for someone who doesn't actively want to like ruin the rights of people that I care about. Like, is that insane? Is that aggressive of me? Am I being
so
demanding?
Radical.
Yeah, stop being so extreme. Asking for trans rights. Oh, you
mean communism? Trans rights? Communism?
yeah. Oh, you mean pure outright communism? But
it's just like, can you define communism, please? You know?
No, that's us. But at least we're here together with you guys watching, and for just £5 or £3 a month, you can support us on Patreon.
There you go. And you should. You absolutely should.
Brandon, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was really, really good to have you on. It was great to chat about the US side with you. It was also great to, obviously, always good to diss a liberal whenever we get that opportunity.
Exactly. Yeah, got to. Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on.
Very, very welcome. And yes, anybody, if you are watching, please do go over. You can find Brandon over on YouTube as A Social Society. He is on TikTok as Social Society Clips. He's also on Instagram as Right Hand Leftist. All of that information will also be in the description box in just a second. You can find me on YouTube and TikTok at the Sneakcret handle, as you know. And if you enjoyed the show tonight, please do go ahead and support us. Hit the subscribe button, hit the likes button, all of that. Remember, there is loads of news. It is all the time. It is depressing, but we are here to cover it. If you want us to cover it, you can help us grow the platform by going over to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support. If you want to hear more this week, you haven't had enough of us yet, tune in on Sunday for the debrief on the weekend. I have been Sneakcret. It's been lovely to see you all today, and I will see you soon.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you. Turn Left.